Why did the Major make the mistake of underestimating her? The morning sun stretched long, pale fingers across the firing range at Forward Operating Base Phoenix. The mountains of Montenegro loomed like ancient judges, their ridges carved by centuries of storms, watching silently as soldiers woke to another day of routine. But one soldier would not remember this morning as routine. For Major Blake, it was the day he made the biggest mistake of his career. He reached for King's custom sniper scope with a casual smirk. He thought he was testing a toy, thought the young British woman polishing rifles in the armory couldn't possibly understand what it meant to hit a target at distance. He thought she was small, delicate, and irrelevant in the harsh arithmetic of war. What happened next would become legend, whispered across barracks in the weeks to follow. But legends don't begin on firing lines. They begin in quiet places, with quiet people who carry storms inside them. King stood in the dim light of the armory hours before that encounter. She was 22, her hair tied in regulation style, her green eyes narrowed on the disassembled rifle laid out like a surgeon's patient. The M24 sniper system was broken down into perfect pieces across her workbench. Every part gleamed from meticulous care. Every edge had been measured, cleaned, tested. Her hands moved with calm precision. She didn't see steel and carbon fiber. She saw lives hanging in balance. A rifle wasn't just a tool. It was breath, survival, hope, sometimes the only thread between a soldier making it home or disappearing into a flag-draped coffin. Perfection wasn't optional. Perfection was survival. At 22 was the youngest weapons specialist ever assigned to Phoenix and the only woman in the Armory Division. She had earned her place with top scores with flawless results in NATO weapons programs. But here, those things didn't seem to matter. To the men who dropped rifles on her workbench, she was the girl who cleaned their tools, a helper, a background figure. "Morning, King," Sergeant Davies muttered as he entered, his Welsh accent heavy with fatigue. He dropped a rifle on her secondary table with the kind of care one gives to a shovel. "That M4 needs cleaning. Patrol yesterday. Standard stuff." Standard stuff. He didn't even meet her eyes. She asked if there were any specific issues. "Just the usual wear and tear," he replied, already heading for the door. "Try not to overcomplicate it. Sometimes a rifle just needs a wipe, not a rebuild." The metal door clanged shut, leaving her with silence and that familiar sting dismissal disguised as advice. Don't overcomplicate things. Don't try too hard. Don't make waves. It was the refrain she'd been hearing since arriving at Phoenix 3 months earlier. She turned back to the M24, Corporal Mitchell's weapon. He had complained about inconsistent groupings, had spent 2 hours the night before hand-fitting a new mount for his scope, adjusting tolerances invisible to most armorers. That was the irony. She could take apart and rebuild NATO's arsenal blindfolded, could diagnose flaws that stumped veterans, could spot a hairline imperfection that might throw a bullet inches off at 800 meters. Yet when Mitchell came to collect his weapon later, he'd grunt, "Thanks," without realizing that the small woman with grease under her fingernails had just saved his accuracy. Her phone buzzed. A message from her younger brother in Cornwall. "Saw the news about your deployment. Mom's worried sick. When are you coming home?" Smiled despite herself, imagining her mother packing the stone cottage, thinking her daughter was in daily firefights. The truth was quieter but in some ways harder. Phoenix wasn't a base. It was logistics, training, maintenance. Soldiers here fought more against boredom and invisibility than against insurgents. For that invisibility cut deeper. She hadn't come to fade into the background. She had come to prove something, that gender meant nothing in a world of skill and grit. But every day, she was reduced to a role that kept others alive, without ever letting her step into the fight. The armory door opened again. Private, fresh-faced and nervous, entered holding a sidearm. "Hey, King, could you take a look at the trigger feels off." Took it without hesitation. Her fingers sensed the problem before her eyes confirmed it, a worn connector, adding drag to the pull. "When did you notice it?" she asked. "Yesterday during. My accuracy was terrible. Other guys said it's in my head, but I trust you more." That admission surprised her. Most treated her work as adequate, never extraordinary. Respect felt real. She stripped the pistol, replaced the connector, and adjusted it until the break was cleaner than factory standards. As she worked, studied her. "How do you know so much? You work like someone who's been doing this for decades." Smiled faintly, her hands never slowing. "My grandfather was a gunsmith, taught me when I was 8. By 12, I was restoring antiques with him. The army taught me the rest." "Incredible," said. Then he paused, almost afraid of his own thought. "I bet you could outshoot half the guys on this base." The words lingered, kept her face neutral. "Shooting and maintaining weapons are different skills. My job is to keep them functional." But even as she said it, a truth twisted inside her. She had spent countless hours on ranges. She had scored in the top percentiles at every evaluation. She had been invited to sniper training once. She declined, choosing the safer path, but she knew she could outshoot most of the men she cleaned for. His pistol clicked back together, its trigger breaking crisply at 4 pounds. He grinned at the result, thanked her, and left. Returned to Mitchell's M24, reassembling it with care. He would never know that the woman he ignored had made him a sharper weapon than he'd ever been before. That was her reality, essential, invisible. Yet's words lingered. Could she outshoot them? The thought burned at her chest. The answer would come sooner than expected. Weeks later, on a Saturday morning sharp with cold sunlight, pushed her cart onto the firing range. Today was the monthly marksmanship competition. 12 of the base's best shooters were gathering to prove themselves for the Top Gun trophy, and a chance to represent Phoenix in NATO's regional championship in Germany. Her role was simple. She wasn't a competitor. She wasn't even considered. She was the armorer. She had inspected every rifle, ensured each scope and barrel gleamed with readiness. She had prepared backup weapons, as if her contribution was a shadow, invisible once the first shot cracked. Staff Sergeant, the competition's organizer, greeted her with a nod. "All rifles staged and ready." "Yes, Sergeant, functioning within all specs." He nodded, already moving on to the men arriving in their confident stride. Corporal Mitchell, Sergeant Davies, Private Torres, the natural talent whispered about as the base's sharpest eye. They joked, ribbed each other, shared wind tips, stood apart behind her cart. She was part of this world and yet not. Then Major arrived, voice cutting across the range. "King, double-check Mitchell's rifle. He claims the scope is off. Don't want excuses when he loses." The laughter that followed from competitors stung worse than his words. Had fitted that scope herself, had spent hours perfecting it, but she obeyed. She tested, measured, ran diagnostics. The rifle was flawless. She returned it with her report. "Weapon is functioning within all specifications, Major. Scope aligned within a quarter MOA." Barely looked at her. "Try to keep the technical jargon down. We're here to shoot, not lecture." The dismissal sank like lead. The competition began. Shots cracked across the crisp air. Watched through her spotting scope, nodding details no one else noticed. Mitchell was steady but uninspired. Davies misjudged the wind. Torres was smooth, each shot precise, his rhythm unshaken. At 600 meters, Anderson surprised everyone with tight groups. At 800, when the wind picked up, Mitchell faltered, Davies collapsed, Torres thrived. Saw it all. She saw the rifles she had prepared sing in the hands of men who never thanked her. She saw Torres post the best score of the day with a weapon she had perfected. He caught her eye afterward, gave a small smile. "Whatever you did to this rifle, King, it's shooting like a dream." Respectful words, but even those came wrapped in assumption. As if today, finally, she had done something right. As if her months of silent excellence had been accidents before this moment. The trophy went to Torres, applause rang. Major praised his dedication, his name was not mentioned. She packed her tools, alone in the shadow of a celebration. She knew she had built their victories piece by piece, screw by screw. But credit flowed only to those holding triggers. She told herself, as she often did, that being the quiet force behind others' success was enough. And yet, as the sun dipped and the soldiers left, a question clung to her like a phantom. What would happen if she stepped out from behind the cart, into the competition herself? What drove her to keep a secret that could end her career? 3 weeks after Torres' victory, the armory lights still burned late into the night. Sat alone at her personal workbench, the world beyond her locked door fading into silence. Most soldiers found comfort in sleep, found it in precision. Spread before her wasn't Torres' rifle or Davies' M4 or Mitchell's battered optics. What lay across her table was something no one on base knew existed. A custom-built rifle, her rifle. It had taken a year of saving, trading, and quiet work to create. Built piece by piece from the Remington 700 action up, it was no ordinary weapon. The stock was a A5, pillared and bedded by her own hands. The barrel, a stainless steel match grade, chambered for .308 Winchester by a German gunsmith she'd visited on leave. A trigger, breaking at 2 pounds with no creep. And the crown jewel, a Night Force NXS scope, 5.5 to 25 magnification, mounted in custom rings she had machined herself on base equipment during off hours. Every Wednesday night after official duties ended performed the ritual. She disassembled the bolt, cleaned each piece under magnification, checked tolerances, recorded data in her logbook. To most, it would look like obsession. To her, it was breathing. Beside her lay the shooting journal, its pages filled with tight handwriting and diagrams. It wasn't just a record. It was her private story, one written in numbers, wind speeds, ballistic charts, and hand-measured groupings. At 800 meters, she averaged sub-half minutes of angle groups. At 1,000, her hits clustered inside 6 inches standards that would impress any military sniper. These weren't lucky shots. They were the outcome of relentless practice. Didn't just train on the official range. She trained at dawn in secret, targets set at distances others never attempted, positions improvised, shooting prone without bipods sitting, even standing. She had studied Olympic shooters for breathing techniques, borrowed mental focus drills from golf champions, and conditioned her body for stability. The military gave her discipline. Her grandfather had given her roots. The rest she forged herself. Tonight was supposed to be routine. Strip the bolt, log the last set of shots, clean every surface until it gleamed. But the sound of boots in the corridor jolted her. Quickly pulled a tarp over the rifle, shifted to Torres' competition weapon, and forced calm into her movements. The door opened. Corporal Anderson stepped in, his face curious. "Burning the midnight oil again, King. You spend more time here than most do on duty." Didn't look up. Torres' rifle needs to be perfect for Germany. Anderson's eyes drifted to the tarp. What's under there? Another project. Her heartbeat spiked. Calm, she told herself. Personal equipment maintenance, nothing military. Personal equipment, you mean like? He leaned slightly closer. Cut him off gently. An old hunting rifle I'm restoring for my grandfather. Sentimental project, not much to see. Anderson studied her a moment longer, suspicion flickering, then nodded. Fair enough. Just, whatever you're doing, keep it up. That rifle work you did for me in the last comp was unbelievable. When the door closed behind him, sat in silence, staring at the tarp. That was too close to the truth. Her phone buzzed. A message from her grandfather in Cornwall. Still fixing rifles for boys who probably can't shoot as well as you. She smiled. His words always cut to the core. She typed back, still behind the scenes, Granddad, but maybe not forever. His reply came fast. Sometimes you have to show them before they'll believe you. Don't hide forever. The words lingered in the dim light. At dawn, walked the quiet perimeter toward the far end of the shooting range, personal equipment slung over her shoulder. The base slept. This hour was her sanctuary. She set up targets at 400, 600, 800, and 1,000 meters markers she had surveyed and measured herself with a laser rangefinder. Her rifle assembled in silence, every click of the bolt a reminder. This was the only place she was free. Her drill this morning was rapid engagement. 6 shots, 3 distances under 90 seconds. The timer beeped, dropped prone, scope zeroed, breath in, breath out. The first target at 400 meters broke clean, impact in the center ring, transition. The 600-meter target demanded instinctive adjustment for wind and drop, hit, transition again. The 800-meter silhouette, she slowed her breathing, let the world narrow to a heartbeat in crosshairs. The shot broke perfectly, round striking dead on. 6 shots, 3 distances, time, 87 seconds. Competitive by NATO standards, better than competitive, superior. She logged it in her journal, fingers steady, heart quiet. But the silence fractured with a buzz in her pocket. "Hey, King, weird question, you ever out at the range super early? Heard shots around 400, sounded precise." "Private." Froze, she typed back. "Range is closed then. Sound probably carries from other facilities. Mountains do strange things with acoustics." His reply came quick. "Yeah, maybe, just sounded like serious work, not random, just curious." She packed her rifle faster than usual, slipping back toward the base before the first stirrings of morning drills. Her secret was fragile. One careless whisper and it would all unravel. But secrecy was a burden. Every morning she carried it heavier. She wasn't just training, she was hiding. Within days she noticed the whispers, conversations pausing when she walked into the mess hall, eyes following her. Even Anderson sat across from her one morning, lowering his voice. Saying someone's training off hours, says he's going to catch them, thinks it's a security risk. Kept her expression calm. That seems like a lot of speculation for distant gunfire. Could be hunters, could be another base. Anderson leaned closer. Maybe, but's planning to get up early tomorrow and find out for himself. Her spoon froze halfway to her mouth. That night sat on her bunk staring at the locked case containing her rifle. Discovery wasn't a matter of if anymore. It was when. And if found her, it wouldn't be admiration that followed. It would be reports, disciplinary hearings, restrictions, maybe even reassignment. But what was worse? To be punished for reaching higher or to waste her gift unseen. Her phone buzzed, a message from her grandfather. Remember, being discovered is sometimes the first step to being recognized. The words carried a weight she wasn't ready to accept. Not yet. At dawn she made her choice. She left the rifle locked away, let find nothing. For one morning she let silence win. But silence doesn't last forever. 2 days later Major summoned her. His office felt colder than usual. Sat in the corner, smug satisfaction radiating from his posture. On his desk lay photographs, grainy but clear. A lone figure at the far end of the range. A distinctive custom rifle glinting in early light. His voice was iron. "Sit down, King. We need to discuss your extracurricular activities." Sat back straight, face calm. Her heart raced, but she knew denial was pointless. "Care to explain?" asked, spreading the photographs. Her voice didn't waver. "That's me, conducting personal marksmanship training." Leaned forward, sharp with vindication. Unauthorized use of military facilities, possession of unregistered weapons, training without clearance. "Major, this is." "I know what it is," snapped, silencing him. His eyes stayed on. "Why, King, why do this?" For months she had hidden behind excuses. Tonight she let the truth out. "Because I'm capable of more than cleaning rifles. I've been shooting since childhood, scored in the top percentiles of every. I can outshoot half this base, sir, but no one ever gave me the chance." His expression darkened. "Your role is weapons maintenance. That's what you were assigned. That's where you excel. This isn't about assumptions, King, it's about discipline." His hands clenched on her knees. "With respect, sir, it is about assumptions. I've been told to stay in my lane, Told that my size, my role, my gender meant I couldn't do more. So I proved it in the only way left to me. The silence afterward was heavy, broke it with a sneer. This proves she can't be trusted. She's insubordinate. She thinks she knows better than her command. His verdict was swift, her rifle confiscated, her training forbidden, her record marked with disciplinary notes, transfer recommendations prepared. Walked out of the office that night feeling hollow. She had shown her light, and it had been snuffed out as insubordination. She was reduced to counting scope mounts, cleaning barrels, filing reports. But the whisper of her grandfather's words lingered in the silence of her quarters. Sometimes, discovery is the first step to recognition. She didn't yet know how right he was. Because far away in the jagged mountains, a storm was coming. And when it hit, King would face a choice that no regulation could contain. What happens when the system depends on someone it refuses to recognize? The briefing room at Forward Operating Base Phoenix buzzed with quiet tension. Charts spread across the long table. Officers murmured about logistics, competitions, reputations. Sat near the back, notebook open, pen steady in her hand. She wasn't here to decide. She wasn't here to lead. She was here to take notes about rifles, ammunition, and maintenance, to sit invisible while men in command argued about the upcoming NATO regional championship. Major's voice cut through the noise. We need to discuss our representation at Germany. Corporal Torres performed well at our base competition, but the international level is another matter. Captain, the Scotsman who ran Phoenix's marksmanship competitions, leaned forward. These won't be weekend shooters. Germany is sending Olympic-level snipers. The French, they're Foreign Legion champions. We're talking about the best in the world. Exactly, replied. I'm not convinced Torres is ready. His pen froze mid-sentence. Torres had shot brilliantly, yes, but she knew his skill wasn't flawless. She had tuned his rifle to perfection, wrung every ounce of precision out of its steel and glass. Without that work, he would never have reached the scores that made him champion, and now his name alone was carrying Phoenix to Germany. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, visiting from Regional Command, scanned the files. You're right to be concerned. Torres is strong but inexperienced. Who else do you have? Mitchell answered, but his performance is inconsistent. Davies lacks the precision. Anderson has promise, but he's new. All male shooters, Hayes said dryly. What about female personnel, anyone with shooting background? The silence was thick, felt it like a heat across her skin. For a heartbeat, every pair of eyes flickered toward her, then away, as if looking directly would open doors they didn't want to walk through. Finally cleared his throat. We have Specialist King. She's our weapons maintenance lead. Technically proficient, the best I've seen, but her role is support, not operational. Hayes's gaze sharpened. Background. Didn't check a file. Outstanding technician, but never tested in competition. Her expertise is technical, not practical. His chest tightened. It was the same half-truth she'd lived under for months. She was excellent, yes, but only with wrenches and gauges. Not with triggers, not in the fight. The rest of her skill, her years of training, her dawn sessions in secret, invisible. What about physical considerations? Added, lowering his voice as if discussing a medical condition. International competition requires carrying heavy loads, shooting from rough terrain, sustaining endurance. She's small, 120 pounds soaking wet. Hayes nodded thoughtfully. Valid concerns. Though I've seen women outshoot men plenty of times, still, you're certain she's not a contender? She's not, said firmly. King is valuable here in her lane, not out there. His pen scratched across the page, but her ears burned. They spoke of her like she was furniture in the room present, functional, irrelevant. The meeting ended with consensus. Torres would compete. The rest was logistics. Closed her notebook, her face a mask. Inside, something dark coiled. As the officers filed out, paused by her chair. His voice softened, almost apologetic. "King, I hope you understand. None of that was personal. We value your skills. Torres needs your support more than ever." She forced a neutral smile. "Of course, Major, I understand." But she didn't, not anymore. That night, long before dawn, slipped once again to the far edge of the range. She set her targets, assembled her rifle, felt the cool air settle on her skin. The base slept. The mountains held their silence. She fired. Prone, sitting, standing. 6 shots in under 90 seconds, every impact true. She recorded it in her logbook. She had achieved NATO competition standards. Alone. Invisible. But invisibility was no longer safe. The next morning, the mess hall buzzed with something different. Conversations that died when she entered. Eyes that lingered. Anderson sat across from her, leaning close. "People are talking about those early morning shots. Says someone's training off hours. He's planning to find out who." Kept her spoon steady. Speculation, could be hunters, could be another base. Anderson's voice dropped. "Thinks it's someone here, thinks it's you." Her pulse quickened. The net was tightening. And then it snapped. 2 days later, she stood in his office, smirked from a corner chair. Photographs lay across the desk, grainy, long-lens shots of at the range, her rifle visible, her posture unmistakable. His voice was cold steel. "Care to explain what I'm looking at?" His voice came steady. "That's me, conducting personal training." Nearly vibrated with satisfaction. "Unauthorized weapons, unauthorized range use, security violations. Major, this is blatant." "Enough," barked, his eyes bored into. "Why, King? Why break protocol like this?" She met his gaze. Months of silence, of swallowing her truth, ended in that moment. "Because I am capable of more than what I'm allowed to show. I've been shooting since I was 8. I can outshoot half this base. But every time I ask for more, I'm told to stay in my lane, so I proved it myself." His jaw clenched. "Your role is maintenance. That's not an assumption. That's your assignment." "With respect, sir," she replied, her voice tightening, "it is an assumption. You assume my size means weakness. You assume my gender means limitation. You assume my role defines my capability, but you've never seen what I can do." The silence after stretched like wire. Then came the hammer, rifle confiscated, personal training banned, record marked with disciplinary notes, transfer recommendation prepared. Walked out of that office hollow, her hands empty, her path narrower than ever. Her secret, the light she had nurtured, had been twisted into proof of her insubordination. She was reduced again to oiling rifles, logging parts, invisible. And yet, sometimes the system underestimates the storms it suppresses. Because days later, the storm came. It began with static across the radio. Medevac 77 emergency transmission. NATO advanced team helicopter down, 40 kilometers northeast. Injuries confirmed. Terrain inaccessible. Request immediate support. Froze mid-inventory, clipboard in hand. The voices across the net painted a grim picture. The crash site perched on a narrow ridge, weather closing fast, helicopter extraction impossible. The only hope, a ground team navigating brutal terrain under a storm clock already ticking down. His voice thundered through command channels. "All available search and rescue personnel, report immediately." Within hours, the truth was clear. Phoenix's standard rescue teams weren't built for this. They had no mountain rescue experts, no advanced navigators. They had strong soldiers, yes, but not the skills this mission required. Torres was reassigned, pulled from his competition training, ordered to join the rescue team as marksman. Others filled roles they weren't prepared for. Medics tasked with climbing cliffs, asked to navigate trackless wilderness. She was sidelined, stripped of trust. Her orders: prepare the equipment, medical kits, radios, ropes. She inspected every strap and buckle, her hands methodical, her face unreadable. But inside, she knew the truth. The crash site was in terrain she had studied during her secret training. She had memorized those ridges, plotted approaches invisible on standard maps. She had climbed slopes others avoided. She had shot through wind tunnels those mountains carved. She knew them. And now 6 soldiers were heading into a storm without the skills she carried. As the rescue team lifted off, stood at the edge of the helipad, the weight of helplessness pressing harder than the rotor wash. She watched the aircraft disappear into gray clouds, her manifest still clutched in her hand. She had given them perfect equipment, but equipment couldn't replace knowledge. Hours later, static filled the radios. Strained voices filtered through. Terrain worse than expected. Visibility near zero. Request route guidance. Response was clipped, helpless. Continue with planned approach. Listened from the armory, her chest tight. She knew exactly where they were, knew they were off track, knew time was bleeding away. By midday, the transmissions grew desperate. 3 hours searching. No sight of crash. Conditions worsening. Request permission to abort. Permission. Walk to the topographical map pinned to the armory wall. She traced the ridges with her finger. She could see it, the correct approach, the angle no one else would consider. She could see the line that led straight to the downed helicopter. Her eyes drifted to the locked storage cage. Inside, under confiscation order, lay her rifle, her pack, her gear, everything she needed, everything she wasn't allowed to touch. Private entered, face tight. "King, Major wants backup kits prepped, just in case." She nodded, her voice steady. "I'll handle it." But lingered, his eyes searched hers. "Be honest with me. Do you think the team can actually do this? Can they reach the site?" Hesitated, then spoke quietly. "The terrain requires skills we don't have." Swallowed, "Then who does?" He left, stood alone, staring at the lock on the cage. Her phone buzzed. A message from her grandfather. Saw the news. "Sometimes rules don't matter when lives are at stake. You know what you must do." Her radio crackled. Torres' voice frayed with exhaustion. "Phoenix, we're running out of time. Conditions deteriorating. We can't find the site." Small hands clenched. Hands dismissed as weak. Hands that had built rifles, drawn maps, logged hours of precision no one had asked for. Her decision was no longer about rules. It was about lives. She reached for her tools. The lock wasn't strong. One twist, one click, and it gave way. The cage opened. Her rifle gleamed in the dim light. The storm had come. And King was done hiding. How far would she go when every step meant disobedience, and every mistake meant death? The lock lay twisted at her feet, broken by a deliberate hand. Inside the cage, her rifle gleamed like a secret set free. King stood motionless for a moment, breathing the weight of what she had just done. There was no undoing it now. The evidence of her defiance sat in plain view: confiscated gear taken back, discipline abandoned, the thin thread of regulation snapped. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady as they slid across the familiar steel. Bolt, stock, scope, sling, assembled with ritual care. She packed her climbing rope, cold weather kit, rations. Every piece of gear had been waiting for this moment, locked away by command, yet built by her for something greater than inspections and inventories. The storm outside growled against the walls of the armory. On the radio, the rescue team's transmissions grew weaker, distorted by static and fatigue. Visibility down to 20 meters, terrain impassable, still no contact with survivors. Zipped the final pouch on her pack, slung it across her shoulders, and looked at the wall clock. If she left now, she had a slim chance of reaching the ridge before the storm closed it off completely. If she waited, the rescue team would fail, the survivors would die, and her silence would bury her forever. She pulled her hood tight and stepped into the night. No alarm sounded. No one stopped her. The base was too consumed with its crisis to notice one woman walking alone toward the perimeter fence. She slipped through a maintenance gate, crossed into the open expanse of snow and rock, and began the climb. The mountains did not welcome her. Wind ripped across the ridges, carrying fine powder that stung her face. Every step up the rocky slope tested the strength of her legs and the weight of her decision. She wasn't just climbing. She was defying. If they caught her, it wouldn't be a reprimand this time. It would be the end of her military career, perhaps even charges. But the voices on the radio wouldn't leave her mind. Soldiers lost in the storm. Injured men on a ridge bleeding out. Time running out. The climb steepened. She drove her boots into snow, pulled herself up with gloved hands, found purchase on jagged stone. Her breath fogged in short bursts, controlled like it always was before a shot. She remembered her grandfather's voice when she was 12, standing beside her at a shooting bench in Cornwall. Steady. It's not strength that steadies the rifle. It's patience. Patience steadies everything. Halfway up the ridge, she stopped to catch her breath, listening. The storm howled, but beneath it she heard faint echoes, not natural, not wind. Distant shouts, clattering steel. The rescue team struggling somewhere in the whiteout. She pushed harder, angling toward the sound, navigating by instinct, and the maps etched into her memory. The ridge narrowed into a knife edge. A misstep here meant a fall into black nothing. Dropped to hands and knees, crawling the spine of rock while wind tried to tear her from its back. Her pack dragged heavy, but she moved with deliberate rhythm. Inch by inch, breath by breath. And then a flicker of movement through the storm. Shapes stumbling below, barely visible. She raised her scope, wiped snow from the lens, and the rescue team. Torres in front, face raw from windburn, his rifle slung uselessly as he tried to lead through terrain he didn't understand. Behind him, 2 medics carried stretchers with empty straps, still searching for their patients. Their formation faltered, lost, minutes from collapse. Exhaled, lowered the scope, and descended the far side of the ridge toward them. She approached from the flank, emerging out of the snow like a ghost. The men froze, weapons half raised until recognition cut through. "King," Torres shouted, disbelief edging into anger. "What the hell are you doing out here?" "Correcting your route," she answered calmly, pulling her compass from her jacket. "You're 3 ridges off. Follow me or you won't make it in time." Major's voice crackled through Torres' radio, sharp with command. "Rescue 1, report status." Torres hesitated. His eyes flicked from steady face to the jagged terrain behind her. For a moment, the weight of rules and survival fought inside him. Then he made his choice. "Rescue 1 to base," Torres transmitted. "We're adjusting course, following new guidance." Static swallowed the reply, turned without waiting, motioning them to follow. The team fell in behind her, trust born not of rank but of desperation. The next hours blurred into a brutal march, navigated by instinct, leading them across hidden ledges, through gullies shielded from the worst of the wind. She cut rope for belays, set anchors, hauled packs where the others faltered. At every pause, she adjusted bearings, recalculated against landmarks only she could see through the storm. Finally, near dawn, the ridge opened onto a plateau by broken metal. The helicopter lay twisted against rock, its rotor blades shattered. Smoke still curled faintly from the wreckage. 2 survivors huddled beside it, barely conscious, faces gray with blood loss and hypothermia. The medics rushed forward. Torres and set perimeter, rifles up, scanning through snow for threats that never came. The mountain itself was the enemy here. "Vitals weak," one medic called. "We need now." Keyed the radio. "Phoenix, this is King. Survivors located, coordinates transmitting, immediate extraction required." For a moment the channel was silent. Then's voice cut through, strained, incredulous. "King, what the—" He stopped himself, then barked, "Copy. Coordinates received. Stand by." Lowered the radio, eyes on the ridge. There would be no time for questions now, not until the survivors were safe. The storm broke briefly, a window in the chaos. A NATO helicopter thundered overhead, fighting the wind as it lowered winch cables. One by one, the survivors and medics were lifted into the dark belly of the aircraft. Torres climbed next, his eyes locking with as the cable pulled him skyward. There was no anger now, only something else: recognition. Was the last. She clipped in, hands steady despite the screaming wind. As the helicopter lifted her away from the wreckage, she looked down at the ridge, at the storm, at the place where her defiance had become the difference between life and death. When they landed back at Phoenix, the base erupted in relief. Medics rushed the survivors into triage. Command gathered in the operations tent, stood apart, rifles slung, clothes torn by rock and wind, her face unreadable. Major entered. His eyes swept the room, then fixed on her. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, Specialist King, my office now. The murmurs followed her as she walked. Soldiers whispered, not with condescension this time, but with something heavier. They had seen her lead, seen her guide, seen her step into a storm where others faltered. Inside the office, closed the door, his jaw tight. He didn't sit. You disobeyed direct orders. You broke into a secured armory. You compromised protocol. Met his stare, and I brought them home. The silence stretched. His face was carved stone, but behind his eyes something shifted. The man who had dismissed her as too small, too fragile, too technical, had seen her carry his soldiers through the mountains. You understand, he said finally, his voice low, that what you did will require a full inquiry. Regulations don't vanish because you were right. Nodded, I understand. But before he could continue, the radio crackled again. A voice from regional command, loud enough for both to hear. Phoenix, this is NATO operations. Word just reached us. Your rescue team succeeded under impossible conditions. Commendations will follow. Whoever led that navigation deserves recognition at the highest level. His eyes flickered. He turned back to recognition. The word hung between them. For the first time, saw not the armorer, not the girl behind the bench, not the support staff. He saw the soldier who had led men through death's teeth and come back carrying lives. Said nothing, she didn't need to. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. What happens when truth can't be buried anymore? The inquiry began before the storm had even cleared from the King sat at a long metal table in the operations tent, a single bulb swinging above her head. Outside, soldiers celebrated survival. Inside, silence pressed like judgment. Major sat across from her, flanked by captain and a clerk scribbling notes. On the table lay the evidence. Her custom rifle, the lock she had broken, the confiscation order with her signature beneath it. Cold proof of defiance. His voice was sharp, official. Specialist King, you stand accused of unauthorized use of secured armory property, unauthorized departure from base, and violation of direct orders. Do you admit to these charges? His hands were folded, her face calm. Yes, sir, I do. Leaned forward, incredulous. You're not even going to defend yourself. She met his gaze. I don't need to defend myself. The survivors are alive, that's my defense. Sat back, shaking his head. Jaw tightened. He wanted to be angry, could see it. Wanted to hammer her down with the full weight of regulation. But something in his eyes betrayed conflict, the image of her on that ridge, guiding his men through the storm, refusing to break. He closed the file slowly. You've left me with a problem, King. Regulations say one thing, reality says another. You saved lives, but you did it by breaking rules that keep this machine running. If everyone decided which rules to follow, chaos would eat us alive. Said nothing. Her silence was not submission. It was truth left on the table, waiting for them to confront it. The inquiry recessed, postponed for further review. But word spread fast. Within a day, whispers filled the mess hall, the motor pool, the barracks. Soldiers who once dismissed her now spoke with something else in their voices, respect, maybe even awe. She led them through the ridge. She saved Torres' team. She knew the terrain better than command. Even her loudest critic avoided her eyes when she passed. But respect didn't erase consequences. By regulation, she was grounded, confined to maintenance duties, stripped of access to live ranges, her rifle locked away once again. She was a hero in whispers and a criminal on paper. The contradiction gnawed at her. Nights were the hardest. She lay awake in her bunk, hearing the distant echo of wind in her mind, feeling the ridge beneath her boots, the storm biting her face. That was the place she belonged. Not here, oiling bolts and signing forms. Her phone buzzed one night, a message from her grandfather. I saw the NATO press release. They're calling it a miracle rescue. They don't know your name, do they? Stared at the screen before typing back. No, they don't. His reply came fast. Dignity doesn't shout, but sometimes it must insist. She put the phone down, her chest heavy. She had acted, she had insisted, and still she was invisible. Days later, NATO inspectors arrived at Phoenix. Not for her, officially, for the survivors. They came to review the rescue, to interview the team, to write reports, but knew sooner or later her name would surface. And it did. Torres stood before the panel of inspectors, his face pale from fatigue, his voice steady. With respect, sirs, the rescue would have failed without Specialist King. She navigated terrain we couldn't handle. She guided us directly to the crash. We'd have lost men without her. The inspectors frowned, flipping through files. Specialist King is listed as weapons maintenance. Are you saying she assumed leadership of the mission? Yes, sir, Torres answered. She took charge when no one else could. Wasn't in the room, but the words carried to her like distant thunder. She had tried to stay in the shadows, tried to let silence speak. Now her silence had allies. By the end of the week, NATO command had summoned her directly. She stood in a stark office in Germany, uniform pressed, heart pounding. Across the table sat Colonel, the French officer overseeing the regional championship. His accent was thick, his eyes sharp. Specialist King, he began, flipping open a file. Your name appears in rescue reports. Some call your actions reckless, others call them heroic. Which do you believe? Chose her words carefully. I believe I did what was necessary when lives were at stake. I broke rules. I accept the consequences. Studied her for a long moment. Do you know why you are here? No, sir. He pushed a paper across the table. The NATO Regional Championship begins in 3 days. Phoenix was set to send Corporal Torres. After your actions, multiple officers have requested you be added. Some insist you replace him entirely. His breath caught. Compete. On the international stage. It was the thing she had dreamed of in secret, the reason she had trained before dawn, the hunger she had buried under silence. But it was also dangerous. If she failed, it would prove every critic right. If she succeeded, it would expose the military's blind spot in a way they could never ignore. Colonel leaned forward. I do not care about politics, specialist. I care about precision. Can you win? Met his gaze, her voice steady. Yes, sir, I can. The decision was sealed. King would compete, not as a replacement for Torres, but alongside him under the Phoenix banner. Official recognition at last. Word spread through Phoenix like fire. Some cheered, some doubted, muttered that it was favoritism, that politics had pushed her forward. Others whispered that maybe, just maybe, it was justice. The night before departure, sat alone in the armory. Her rifle lay across her lap, cleaned and oiled, scope adjusted to perfection. She traced the stock with her fingers, remembering every secret dawn she had carried it into the storm. Now it would see the light in front of the world. Private entered quietly, setting a mug of coffee beside her. Big day tomorrow, he said. Biggest, she replied. He hesitated. I know you're nervous. Anyone would be, but you've already proved yourself. Out there on the ridge with Torres, you've got nothing left to prove. Looked at him, a faint smile touching her lips. That's where you're wrong. I proved I could save lives. Tomorrow I prove I can stand as their equal. Nodded understanding. Then go win it for all of us. As dawn broke, boarded the transport plane with Torres and the Phoenix team. Germany awaited. So did the championship. She strapped her rifle across her chest, heart steady, mind clear. For months she had lived in silence. Tomorrow her shots would speak louder than words ever could. What happens when the whole world watches, waiting for you to fail? The transport touched down in Germany beneath a pale morning sky. The tarmac glistened with frost, breath visible in every exhale. King stepped off the ramp with her rifle case in hand, the weight of it heavier than steel. Behind her, Corporal Torres joked with the others, masking his nerves with bravado. Walked in silence, eyes on the hangar ahead where flags from 12 nations fluttered like silent judges. The NATO Regional Marksmanship Championship. For years, had followed it in grainy videos and online reports. Elite soldiers from across the alliance, sharpshooters who had trained for decades, men and women who lived for precision. Now she stood among them, the invisible armorer from Phoenix, suddenly thrust into a spotlight she had never sought. Inside the hangar, soldiers gathered around tables stacked with rifles, scopes, and ammunition. The air buzzed with tension and the low murmur of different languages. French, German, Polish, American. Each team wore their flag with pride. Kept her eyes forward as introductions were made. When her name was spoken, there was a pause, curious glances, raised eyebrows, the faintest scoff. Specialist King, United Kingdom, weapons maintenance. A French competitor smirked, muttering something under his breath that made his teammate chuckle. An American sniper, broad-shouldered and calm-eyed, studied her without expression. The silence that followed her introduction said more than words ever could. What is she doing here? She ignored it. She had heard worse in whispers at Phoenix. Torres leaned close as they moved to their assigned bay. Don't let them get in your head. Half of them are already rattled. They don't know you. That scares them. But wasn't sure they were scared. They looked at her like she was a novelty, an oddity brought here by politics rather than skill. She felt the weight of their doubt pressing down harder than the rifle case in her hands. The competition began with a briefing. Colonel stood before the assembled shooters, his voice carrying through the hangar. This is not war, but it is discipline. Today you will face distance, wind, and time. Targets at 400, 600, 800, and 1,000 meters. Shooting positions randomized. Scores recorded by independent judges. Precision alone decides victory. His heart beat steady. These were the numbers she had lived by. Her secret dawn training had been built for this. And yet, as she took her place on the firing line, her throat tightened. Not from fear of the targets, but from the eyes. Dozens of them, watching, waiting, expecting her to break. The first relay began. Shooters prone at 400 meters. A simple warm-up by championship standards. Unfolded her bipod, settled behind the scope, and let the world narrow. Breath in, breath out. The first shot broke clean. The steel plate rang faintly across the cold air, dead center. A murmur rippled behind her. The second shot, the third. Each landed true. She logged her group in her mind, recorded the wind, adjusted her scope. But discipline wasn't enough to silence the voices. She's lucky. First round flukes. She won't last at distance. Closed her ears to them, focusing instead on the memory of her grandfather's voice. Patience steadies everything. At 600 meters, the wind shifted crosswise. Several shooters faltered, rounds drifting wide. Adjusted her dope by instinct, compensating for gusts others didn't see. Her group stayed tight. The judges recorded scores, was tied for third overall. Torres slapped her shoulder, grinning. Told you, they don't know who they're dealing with. But her face stayed calm. This wasn't victory, not yet. The next stage was harder. 800 meters, standing to prone transition, timed. Felt the eyes again, waiting for her to stumble, to fumble under pressure. The whistle blew. She dropped prone, rifle snapping into position with fluid speed. The first round cracked, high right. She corrected instantly, second round striking center. third, fourth, fifth, each cleaner. When time expired, Sgroup measured than most of the men around her. She lay still a moment, breathing in the silence before rolling to her knees. This time the whispers weren't mocking, they were curious, respectful. But doubt still lingered. The final stage loomed, 1,000 meters prone unsupported, no bipod, no sandbag, just body, breath, and steel. The kind of shot that separated champions from pretenders. As prepared her rifle, a voice spoke low beside her. The American sniper calm-eyed, his flag patch faded from countless deployments. Ignore them. At 1,000 meters there's no gender, no politics, only the wind, only the trigger. Nodded, she didn't need encouragement, but it mattered hearing it from someone who had no reason to offer it. The whistle blew. Steadied herself, elbows digging into the frozen ground. The target shimmered in the mirage, a faint square of white against gray stone. 1,000 meters of air, shifting wind, invisible gravity. She slowed her breathing, focused. The first shot broke, a pause, then a faint ping drifted back. Hit. She adjusted, fired again, another hit. Her hands moved like extensions of the rifle, adjusting for subtle gusts, correcting by instinct. The world narrowed to trigger brakes, recoil, steel plates singing across distance. When time ended, she lay still, chest rising slowly. 10 rounds, 9 impacts, her group yet. The judges recorded the scores. King, specialist, weapons maintenance, invisible armorer, ranked second overall, 1 point behind the American veteran. For a moment the hangar was silent. Then applause rose, hesitant at first, then swelling. Even the French sniper who had scoffed at her earlier gave a short nod of respect. Torres grinned ear to ear, shouting over the noise. Told you they don't know who you are. But didn't smile. Her victory wasn't about applause. It was about something deeper. She had stood in the light, rifle steady, and proven that she belonged. Afterward, Colonel approached her. His expression was unreadable, but his words carried weight. Specialist King, you have forced us to reconsider. Not just you, but what you represent. You remind us that skill wears no face, no rank, no gender. It simply reveals itself when called. Bowed her head slightly. Thank you, sir. But even as she accepted his words, she knew this wasn't the end. The championship was proof, yes, but proof alone doesn't change systems. Back at Phoenix, the inquiry still hung over her. Regulations still demanded punishment. Her future was still uncertain. That night, alone in her barracks, sat with her rifle across her lap. She thought of the ridge, the storm, the survivors alive because she had broken rules. She thought of the championship, the shots that had silenced doubt. And she wondered, would it ever be enough? Her phone buzzed, a message from her grandfather. I heard the scores. Second place in the world. You've already won. Don't forget it. She closed her eyes, whispering to herself, not yet, not until they see me. Because victory wasn't medals or applause. Victory was recognition, not for her ego, for every silent soldier dismissed before they were seen. King had forced the world to notice, but the hardest battle was still ahead. The battle for her place in it. What happens when recognition and punishment arrive at the same time? The flight back to forward operating base Phoenix was quieter than the one out. The team carried medals, photographs, and NATO commendations. Torres cracked jokes to hide nerves, clutching his silver trophy like a child with a new toy. But sat apart, her rifle case resting across her knees, gaze fixed on the dark horizon outside the small aircraft window. Second place in the world. Recognition whispered in corridors, her name etched into championship records. Yet no smile touched her lips. She knew what waited at Phoenix. Rules don't vanish because applause grows loud. The plane touched down at dusk. Soldiers gathered at the tarmac, cheering Torres, clapping shoulders, shouting jokes. A few nodded too, their voices softer but tinged with respect. She acknowledged them with a small incline of her head, nothing more. She didn't crave cheers. She craved truth. Major met them at the hangar. His jaw was clenched, his posture rigid. Caught the storm in his eyes, command forced into a corner by reality. He shook Torres' hand, offered congratulations, then turned to Specialist King, my office, immediately. The mess hall fell silent at his tone, followed without a word. Inside, the office was dim, a single lamp casting long shadows across desk. The inquiry file still lay there, thicker now, padded with NATO commendations alongside disciplinary reports. Sat heavily. You leave me in an impossible position, King. On paper, you're insubordinate. You broke into a secured armory, orders, endangered protocol. And yet, he pushed the commendation forward. You saved lives in the mountains. You carried this unit in Germany. NATO command wants your name submitted for commendation. Some even whisper promotion. Stood tall, hands clasped behind her back. What do you want, sir? Stared at her, his voice sharp. I want soldiers I can control, soldiers who follow orders. You disobeyed, and now every man on this base sees you celebrated for it. That makes my job harder. Her chest tightened. The truth lay bare between them. She had proven herself, but in doing so, she had exposed the cracks in their system. Leaned forward, voice low. You think this is about you, King? It's bigger than that. If command lets this slide, it sets precedent. Every soldier with an ego will believe rules don't matter. Discipline collapses. And yet if we punish you, we look like fools, punishing the woman NATO just applauded. Said nothing. Silence had always been her sharpest weapon. Finally sighed, rubbing his temples. You'll remain restricted to maintenance until regional command decides. That's all I can give you. Dismissed, walked out into the night. Soldiers in the mess glanced her way, some offering quiet nods of respect. But respect didn't erase chains. She was still confined, still locked out of the ranges she had mastered. Days passed, rumors thickened. Some said she'd be discharged, others said she'd be promoted. The uncertainty gnawed at the base. Soldiers whispered about her in the halls, her name on every tongue. One evening, Torres found her in the armory, hunched over a rifle she wasn't allowed to fire. You should be proud, he said. Didn't look up. Pride doesn't change paperwork. He hesitated, then pulled a folded sheet from his pocket. I wrote a statement for command, told them the truth, that you saved us on that ridge, that the championship wasn't politics, it was justice. She finally looked at him, surprise flickering in her eyes. Why? Because you've done more for this unit than anyone realizes, and because I owe you my life. Accepted the paper quietly, but inside something shifted. For the first time, someone had spoken for her, not about her. But not all voices were kind. Cornered her outside the barracks days later, bitterness sharp in his tone. Enjoy it while it lasts, King. You think one medal makes you untouchable. They'll cut you down. They always do. She met his glare with calm. Maybe, but they can't unwrite the truth. And that truth was spreading. NATO publications printed her scores. Foreign officers asked questions. Her name, once invisible, now threaded through conversations far beyond Phoenix. Yet within the walls of her base she remained caged. Nights stretched long, her rifle locked away again, her hands restless. One night, as the storm winds rattled the tin roof of the armory, she opened her journal, the one filled with charts, scores, wind diagrams, records of every secret shot she had ever fired. She flipped to the first page. Her grandfather's handwriting stared back at her, scrawled years ago, "Patience steadies everything." She whispered the words aloud, her voice barely audible. But patience doesn't change the world. The decision came days later, not from Phoenix but from above. NATO Regional Command summoned her to a video conference. Sat beside her, expression unreadable. On the screen, Colonel's voice was clear. Specialist King, after reviewing reports from Phoenix, the rescue mission, and the championship, NATO Command recommends you be retained, commended, and reassigned to advanced sniper training. His chest tightened. The words were a door, one she had dreamed of, one she had feared would never open. His jaw worked, but he said nothing. The decision was out of his hands now. Specialist King continued, "You protocol, that cannot be ignored. But you also demonstrated skill and courage that cannot be buried. Sometimes command must recognize what it does not expect. Congratulations." The screen went dark. The silence in the office was thick. Finally spoke, his voice quiet but heavy. "You forced their hand, King. I don't know if you realize what that means. They'll train you now. They'll push you harder than anyone else. And if you fail, they'll say it was proof they were right all along." Met his eyes. "Then I won't fail." For the first time, stern facade cracked. Not a smile, but the faintest nod. Respect, grudging but real. That night, as walked through the base, soldiers looked at her differently. No longer invisible, no longer dismissed. She was still a target of whispers, but the whispers had changed. Curiosity, respect, even hope. Caught up with her outside the barracks, grinning. "So it's true, advanced training." "It's true," she said simply. He shook his head in wonder. "They'll never underestimate you again." Looked out at the dark ridges beyond the base, the same ridges where she had once trained alone in silence. "They'll try," she murmured, "but I'll be ready." And in her heart she knew this was not the end. The rescue, the championship, the inquiry, they were chapters. The real test lay ahead. Advanced training. A world where failure meant erasure and success meant rewriting what was possible. King had stepped out of the shadows, but the light was harsh, and it demanded everything. What happens when the silence you once lived in becomes the silence others now listen for? The advanced sniper course was held in the Bavarian Alps, a place where winter clung to the mountains like armor. King arrived with little more than a rucksack, her rifle case, and the weight of expectations heavy on her shoulders. NATO command hadn't eased her path, they had sharpened it. The instructors here weren't looking for talent. They were looking for failure, and many of them wanted her to be the proof that a woman didn't belong. The first morning, she stood on the icy firing line beside 14 men from across the Alliance. Each had combat deployments, kill counts, reputations carved in places she had never been. Had none of that. She was still the armorer from Phoenix, the one whispered about but never fully accepted. The lead instructor, a Canadian major with eyes like flint, paced the line. "This is not about medals. This is not about politics. This is about survival. You will shoot in cold, in wind, in exhaustion. You will crawl until your bones ache. You will fail if you hesitate. And if you cannot handle it, leave now." No one moved. Training began with stalking exercises. Crawled through frozen mud for hours, her body ached, her lungs burned. She learned to move like shadow, to merge with ground, to wait so still that frost gathered on her eyelashes. The men scoffed at first, whispering that she was too light, too small, too fragile. But when the instructors called for detection tests, slipped unseen within meters of the observers, her scope crosshairs steady on targets that never knew she was there. Then came the cold shoot drills, one chance, no sighters at distances beyond a kilometer. Breathed, calculated wind drift by instinct, trusted the hours logged in secret back at Phoenix. Her rounds struck steel, not by luck but by discipline. Each success silenced another whisper. But training wasn't just about skill. It was about endurance. Night marches through snow, days without sleep. Simulated missions where instructors screamed, pushed, broke down even the strongest, faltered at times. Her body betrayed her, smaller frame carrying the same weight as men twice her size. Blisters tore open, shoulders bruised, muscles screamed. In the dark of the barracks, she curled on her bunk, every breath a question: can I keep doing this? And yet every morning she rose, because she had lived invisibility. She had lived dismissal. Pain was temporary. Silence had been worse. The weeks blurred into months. Slowly, respect shifted. Men who had doubted her began to seek her wind calls. They watched the way she logged every shot, every variable. They saw her patience, her steadiness, the discipline that didn't shout but endured. One evening, after a brutal 20-hour field exercise, the Canadian major called her aside. His expression was unreadable. "You know why you're here, King. Half this staff wanted you to fail, wanted to prove the experiment was flawed. You haven't failed." Said nothing. He studied her for a long moment, then added, "Skill is undeniable, but skill is not enough. This course isn't just about marksmanship. It's about judgment, about knowing when not to fire. That's where dignity lies." His words echoed in her mind for days, knowing when not to fire. The final test arrived in a frozen valley at dawn. A simulated mission. Pairs of snipers ordered to infiltrate, observe, and relay intelligence without firing a shot. Failure meant detection. Success meant silence. Moved with her partner, an American named. They crawled for hours, frost-biting skin, hunger gnawing. At the final ridge, they found their vantage. Targets moved in the valley below, role players simulating enemy patrols. Whispered, "Easy shots, we could take them all." Adjusted her scope, breath steady. "That's not the mission." He grinned, "Wouldn't hurt to show them." She shook her head. "Restraint proves more than bullets." They held their silence. Hours passed. Observations logged, intel relayed. No shots fired. When extraction came, their team was one of the few that had completed the mission without breaking discipline. At graduation, stood with the others in the crisp mountain air. Snow fell lightly, dusting their berets. The Canadian major spoke. "You were tested in skill, in endurance, in patience. Some of you proved your precision. Some proved your strength, but Specialist King, you proved something rarer. You proved that silence is not weakness. It is control." He saluted her, in front of everyone. And in that moment, remembered the armory back at Phoenix. The rifles she had cleaned without recognition. The competitions she had watched from the shadows. The ridge where she had broken orders to save lives. The championship where every eye waited for her to fail. She had been invisible. Now she was undeniable. Weeks later, back in Cornwall, sat with her grandfather by the old workbench where it had all begun. He handed her a rifle part, eyes proud, hands trembling with age. "You've gone farther than I ever dreamed," he said. Smiled faintly, "Not far enough yet." He chuckled softly, "Always more to prove." Then his face grew serious. "But promise me something. Promise me you won't let their noise drown out your silence, because silence is where the truth lives." She nodded, eyes damp. Outside, the sea crashed against the cliffs, timeless, steady. King stood at the edge of it all, knowing the battles ahead would be many, but knowing, too, that she had already changed something. Not just for herself, for every silent soldier dismissed before they were seen. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.